Have you ever seen a teacher risk everything for a child? The black teacher at the daycare center slept on the floor with the baby. The billionaire saw it. And then what happened? This is unacceptable. An employee sleeping on the floor like an animal. Principal Patricia's shrill voice echoed through the hallway of Elite Gardens Preschool at 6 o'clock in the morning. Call security immediately. Kesha Johnson slowly opened her eyes, still lying on the colorful carpet of the nursery. In her arms, little Thomas, only 8 months old, was sleeping soundly for the first time in 3 days. She didn't move. She didn't justify herself. She just looked at the principal with a calmness that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms. You know that children with special needs require different care, Kesha said softly, stroking the back of the baby who suffered from mild cerebral palsy. Thomas can only sleep when he feels constant human warmth. Patricia snorted, adjusting her expensive blazer. Don't give me excuses. This is a prestigious institution, not a shelter. Parents pay $40,000 a year for their children to receive professional care, not this. Outside, a black Bentley pulled discreetly into the parking lot. Jonathan Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries and father of little Thomas, had arrived earlier than usual to pick up his son. Through the window, he watched the whole scene without being noticed. Could this moment change everything for this teacher? Stay tuned to Black Voices to find out. Kesha was only 26 years old, but she carried the responsibility of supporting 3 younger siblings after her parents died in an accident. With a degree in special education with honors, she had accepted the job at the elite daycare because it paid triple what any other institution would offer. What she didn't expect was to discover that her degree meant less than the color of her skin in that environment. Gather your things. You're fired, Patricia declared coldly. Inappropriate behavior and violation of institutional rules. That's when something interesting happened. Kesha smiled. Not a smile of resignation or humility, but something different. As if she were keeping a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. Sure, Miss Patterson. But first, I need to wait for Thomas's father to arrive. Security protocols. You understand? What Patricia didn't know was that for the past 2 months, Kesha had meticulously documented every irregularity at that school. From teachers leaving children alone to smoke to the overbilling scheme that inflated parents' bills by thousands of dollars a month. If this story of injustice and determination touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Black Voices, because what happened when that billionaire finally entered the room would not only change Kesha's life, but expose secrets that the entire elite preferred to keep buried. Jonathan Blackwell pushed the living room door open silently, his $3,000 Italian shoes making only a whisper on the waxed floor. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. His private housekeeper had reported that Thomas had been crying incessantly for days, but there was his son sleeping peacefully in the arms of a woman he had never seen before. Mr. Blackwell! Patricia practically shouted, her face turning red. What a terrible coincidence! I just caught this employee violating our most basic protocols. Rest assured, she will be removed immediately. Kesha stood up carefully, holding Thomas as if he were made of crystal. Her eyes met Jonathan's, not with submission or fear, but with a dignity that made him hesitate before speaking. Daddy! Thomas had woken up and was reaching out his little arms toward his father. But when Jonathan approached to pick him up, the baby started crying and clung tighter to Kesha. This is absolutely unacceptable, Patricia continued, her shrill voice cutting through the morning air. Mr. Blackwell, you need to understand that this woman was sleeping on the floor like an animal. What kind of example does this set for the other children? Jonathan watched the scene with growing confusion. Thomas had never been this attached to anyone, not even the 3 highly qualified nannies he had hired on the recommendation of Elite Gardens itself. Kesha finally spoke, her calm voice cutting through Patricia's hysteria. Mr. Blackwell, your son has sensory difficulties due to mild cerebral palsy. He needs constant contact to regulate his body temperature and feel safe. The other teachers, she paused, choosing her words carefully, prefer more distant methods, more professional methods. Patricia corrected sharply. We are not a regular daycare center, Mr. Blackwell. We are an elite educational institution. It was then that Jonathan noticed something interesting. Kesha didn't seem surprised or desperate as someone who had just lost her job should be. There was something in her eyes, a quiet certainty that intrigued him. 3 months earlier, Kesha had taken that job out of financial desperation. Her parents had died in a car accident, leaving her responsible for 3 teenage siblings and a mortgage that consumed 80% of her income. Elite Gardens paid $42,000 a year, much more than any public school. But from day one, she had sensed that something was deeply wrong with that place. The children with special needs were systematically neglected. Less qualified white teachers were given the best shifts and the smallest classes. And Patricia had a very particular system of discipline for families who questioned her methods. "Mr. Blackwell," Patricia said, adjusting her blazer authoritatively, "I assure you, we will find a much more suitable replacement to care for Thomas. Someone who understands our standards." Kesha gently stroked Thomas's back, who had stopped crying completely in her arms. "Of course," she replied, but there was something in her tone that made Patricia frown. "I'm sure you'll make the right decision for your son." Jonathan looked at Patricia, then at Kesha, then at his son, who was clearly calmer than he had been in weeks. Something wasn't right. In 16 years of building a business empire, he had learned to trust his instincts. And right now all of them were screaming that there was much more going on here than met the eye. "Patricia," he said slowly, "I need to talk to you two separately before I make any decisions." What Patricia didn't know was that during those 3 months documenting irregularities, Kesha had discovered something much more serious than child neglect. She had found evidence of a fraud scheme involving systematic overbilling, ghost teachers on the payroll, and embezzlement of funds intended for children with special needs. Most interestingly, she knew exactly who was behind it all and had the evidence stored in a very safe place. While Patricia talked about institutional standards and professional conduct, Jonathan sat across from Kesha in a small office adjacent to the nursery. "Tell me everything," he said simply. For the next 20 minutes, Kesha laid out her findings with the precision of a prosecutor. She showed him photos, audio recordings, bank statements, and a detailed log of every incident she had witnessed. Jonathan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and asked one question. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" "Because I needed someone with your influence to make it stick," Kesha replied honestly. "The police might ignore a teacher's complaints, but they can't ignore a billionaire's." Jonathan nodded slowly. That afternoon, he called his legal team and ordered a full investigation into Elite Gardens Preschool. 2 weeks later, Patricia Patterson was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and child endangerment. The school was shut down, and a class action lawsuit was filed by 47 families, seeking $12 million in damages. Kesha was offered her job back with a $20,000 raise, but she declined. "I want to do more than just care for one child," she told Jonathan. "I want to fix the system." Jonathan respected her ambition. He offered her a partnership instead. Together, they created a task force to audit elite schools across the country, focusing on the treatment of children with special needs. The first audit revealed systemic issues at 12 other institutions, leading to the arrest of 5 administrators and the recovery of $7.8 million in misappropriated funds. Kesha's role expanded beyond documentation. She became the face of the movement, speaking at conferences, testifying before state legislatures, and launching a non-profit dedicated to inclusive education. 6 months after Patricia's arrest, the task force released its first annual report. Title: Behind the Ivy, The Hidden Crisis of Elite Education. The 300-page document detailed how prestigious schools often prioritized image over substance, leaving vulnerable children to suffer in silence. The report made national headlines, sparking a wave of reforms. Jonathan stood beside Kesha at the press conference, holding a check for $5 million to launch a restitution fund. "This is just the beginning," he said to the cameras. "The restitution fund we set up has already distributed $4.5 million. The children who were neglected now have access to top-notch therapy at no cost to their families." 3 months after Patricia's arrest, Kesha had received calls from dozens of parents. Not just from Elite Gardens, but from similar schools across the country. Stories of abusive billing, systematic neglect, unprepared teachers, and principals who prioritized profit over childcare. "We want you to help us," said Mrs. Rodriguez, mother of a 6-year-old autistic child. "You were the only one who had the courage to speak the truth. The only one who documented everything and took action." That was how the Kesha Johnson Institute for Inclusive Education was born. Not just a school, but a training center for teachers, a laboratory for developing specialized protocols, and an oversight organization that audited schools suspected of abusive practices. Jonathan had offered $10 million in initial funding. Kesha accepted, but only as an investment, not as a donation. "I want to build something sustainable," she had explained. "Something that doesn't depend on the goodwill of billionaires to survive." Within 9 months, the institute was serving more than 400 children directly and had trained 237 specialized teachers. The Johnson-Blackwell Protocol for Sensory Care had been officially adopted by the Department of Education in 3 states. "There's one more thing," Jonathan said, handing her an official envelope. This arrived today. It was an invitation from the National Congress. Kesha had been invited to testify before the Education Committee on necessary reforms to the system of protection for special children in private schools. "They're going to ask me about that morning," Kesha murmured, reading the invitation about why I slept on the floor with Thomas. "And what will you say?" She smiled. But it wasn't the enigmatic smile of the early days. It was something new, lighter, more hopeful. That sometimes dignity isn't about keeping your composure, but about doing what's right, even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. The following week, the congressional hearing room was packed. Television cameras captured every word as Kesha, wearing a simple navy blazer, answered questions from congressmen with the same methodical calm she had displayed when exposing Patricia. "Miss Johnson," said Congressman Williams, "in your opinion, what is the biggest flaw in the current educational oversight system?" "The assumption that expensive schools automatically provide better care," Kesha replied bluntly. "For 3 months, I documented an institution that charged $40,000 a year per child, but provided care inferior to that of any well-run public daycare center. And how do we change that? Radical transparency, quarterly surprise audits, mandatory certified training for any professional working with special children, and most importantly, listen to the children. They know when they are being neglected." The testimony was broadcast nationally. 3 hours later, Kesha's office received 417 calls from parents, educators, and investors wanting to get involved with the institute. Marcus, now a journalism graduate and working as the institute's communications director, walked into the office with a stack of newspaper clippings. "Sis, you've become a national reference on inclusive education. Harvard wants you to teach a course. Princeton has offered you a permanent chair." Kesha shook her head. "I don't want to be a university professor. I want to continue working directly with the children." That night, she visited Thomas, now 16 months old, walking on his own and speaking his first words. Jonathan had hired 2 full-time specialized therapists and turned part of their mansion into a sensory development center. KK. Thomas ran to her as soon as he saw her. His steps still a little clumsy but determined. "He only started talking after you implemented the tactile communication protocol," Jonathan said, watching his son interact naturally with Kesha. 3 pediatricians said he would never speak before the age of 3. "He just needed to feel safe enough to try," Kesha replied, kneeling down to Thomas's height. "Special children aren't defective. They just navigate the world differently." A year after Patricia's arrest, Kesha received an unexpected letter. It was from her, written from prison. "Kesha, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to protect. I met a woman here whose autistic daughter graduated from medical school thanks to a teacher who believed in her. I realized that I wasted 15 years trying to mold special children instead of adapting the world for them. I deeply regret the harm I caused." Kesha folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her drawer, not out of anger or satisfaction, but as a reminder that even people who commit cruel acts can eventually find redemption. During an interview on national television, the host asked, "Kesha, did you plan this revenge from day one?" It wasn't revenge, she corrected gently. It was documentation. When you see systematic injustice, you have two choices. Accept it as normal or document it meticulously until you have enough evidence to change it. I chose the latter. And what advice would you give to people facing similar situations? Kesha looked directly into the camera. Strategic patience is more powerful than impulsive anger. Document everything. Find allies and remember the best revenge is not destroying those who hurt you, but building something so important that the injustice you suffered becomes irrelevant. Today, 5 years after that morning when she slept on the floor with Thomas, Kesha runs an institute valued at $80 million, has been on the cover of Time magazine as Educator of the Year, and has trained more than 2,000 specialized teachers. Patricia remains in prison, working in the laundry, and losing weight due to the stress of having destroyed her own life out of greed. The Kesha Johnson Institute has literally saved thousands of special children from educational neglect. And it all started because one woman decided that sleeping on the floor to comfort a child was more important than keeping up appearances for superiors who would never respect her anyway. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not to repay the evil you have suffered. It is to turn your pain into purpose and build a legacy that your enemies could never imagine. If this story of transforming injustice into social impact has touched you, subscribe to Black Voices for more stories that prove that intelligence, documentation, and determination always win out over cruelty, prejudice, and arrogance in the long run.